Hey everybody, and welcome to another little installment of Theology Now. Thanks to all of you who maybe dropped me an email or a bit of correspondence from last week's video when I was talking about signs and wonders, and many of you were agreeing, which I enjoyed obviously, and adding your own commentary and your own flavour and experiences, which was really insightful. There was also a comment or two which said perhaps the church also does the opposite, which is there's an area of the church's heart which doesn't seek miracles, doesn't expect any supernatural, doesn't pursue God for more than the completely ordinary. And that's also probably a real truth and a stumbling of the modern church. And so somehow we maybe need to find somewhere in the middle, which is this living and positive tension of faith and life together with the scripture that calls us into an anticipation of God's miraculous work, but without being hung up on it, as it were. There was also a few of you made an interesting comment about the fact that the rooster crowed 3 times, and there's perhaps a humorous irony in that. Maybe the humorous irony is more in the fact that in Mark chapter 14 we're told that the rooster actually only has to crow twice, not 3 times. So for those of us who read our Bibles, we would have seen perhaps the irony in that comment or two. Be that as it may, as we move on to the next sign in John's Gospel, which is in John chapter 5, it is actually a really quite annoying sort of story, but it's also a brilliant story at the same time. It's annoying because the character who's involved with Jesus just seems to come across so negatively. The circumstance is that Jesus is in Jerusalem. It is the Sabbath day. He is at the pool of Bethsaida. And this is traditionally a place where many people with ailments and conditions would gather for hopefully a miraculous healing. The legend has it that when the pool that was there was stirred up, you could jump in and get healed if you could jump. There was the understanding that there was perhaps an angel in the water and that you would be healed if you entered the water at that time. So Jesus goes to this place. He sees this fellow who we're told has been there for a long time. He's been sick for 38 years. And Jesus asks him a question and says, "Do you want to be healed? Do you want to be well?" Well, instead of answering the question, the fellow makes perhaps what you might say are just excuses. He says, well, whenever the water stirred up, somebody else gets in first and there's nobody here to help me. So he blames everyone else, and he blames the fact that people don't help him. So he comes across pretty poorly at the beginning. Jesus then says to him, okay, just take up your mat and go home, you're healed. And the fellow does that. But there is no word of gratitude. There's no inquiry into who are you, Lord. There's just this sense of, okay, gathers his mat and off he goes, and then he immediately seems to get into trouble with the Jewish authorities who judge him and say, listen, it's the Sabbath day, you shouldn't be carrying your mat. And then the man then turns around and blames Jesus, and he says, well, the guy that healed me, he told me to carry it home. And then of course they inquire, well, who told you? They didn't ask about the healing, they didn't inquire about this miraculous event, they just asked who told you to break the law of the Sabbath. And so they are now looking for Jesus. So there is trouble now being stirred up. Jesus finds the fellow a little bit later on, we're told, and says these really almost disruptive and difficult theological words. Jesus says to him, listen, stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. Strange phrase. Scholars have wrestled over this one many times for years to figure out, well, what's Jesus saying? Is he saying that there's a very specific judgment on this fellow for some particular sins that he's committed, and if he keeps committing them then he'll get judged some more? Or is there something else going on? Well, I don't agree with what I've just proposed, because Jesus actually teaches against that in other parts of the Synoptic Gospels. I think what Jesus is actually saying here is something along the lines of, look, quit living in the darkness or dark things will happen to you. Live in the light and good things will happen to you. maybe not a profound theological point, it just seems to be the way the world works, that if we live in the dark and reckless activities of the world, then more likely something's going to go wrong with us. If we live in the light, more likely we'll be blessed, and that there will be a grace upon our lives. And so I think Jesus brings this to the fore and challenges this man into that life. Well, the fellow doesn't receive that very well. He immediately runs back off to the authorities and tells them, it was Jesus, it was that guy. He told me to carry the mat. So he sort of rats out on Jesus and sells him off to the authorities. So what an awkward story, right? You might almost think it feels like a healing was wasted on this guy, because there's no gratitude, there's no inquiry of, who are you, Lord? Can I follow you? Can I learn from you? There's a sense of entitlement, there's a sense of victimhood that he plays into, and then he turns around and it's like he betrays Jesus just in that quick moment off to the authorities. So really annoying character, it feels like, difficult story. But the punchline to the whole story is normally actually in the paragraph afterwards. In the modern translations of the Bible, the paragraph after this story is normally, sectioned away with another title on it that says Jesus claims to be equal with God, or Jesus works on the Sabbath. And that's the point of this story, is that when Jesus is later confronted by the authorities, and they say to him, how come you're doing these things on the Sabbath? He says, my Father is working this day, and so I am working too. So Jesus here is cryptically putting himself in the same category, the same theological category as God the Father. He's doing something really controversial, even scandalous, to claim to be in the same category, somehow in the same arena as God the Father. Just as he is working, so the Son is working. So John is pulling us into the light, into the center of God the Son being the revelation of God the Father. It's beautiful. There's also one little catch to this story which is really quite brilliant, in that it casts an X-ray over us, in that we might sometimes look at this story and look at this fellow and think he doesn't deserve a healing. The healing was wasted on him. What kind of a guy is he? And we find ourselves sitting in the seat of judgment, perhaps like the Jewish authorities. And so the light then shines back upon us to say, well, perhaps God is working beyond our normal ideas of what is reasonable or who deserves it. That to the undeserving and the ungrateful and those who might feel entitled or have a victim mentality, they're the ones who God actually pours grace upon grace to see what might grow. And it is not for us to judge, but for us to bless. So, more food for thought from the brilliant work of John's Gospel. Until next time, much peace.